Andy and I met back in about late 90s, about 1999, when we both came over from England, although we didn't know each other in England, although a few people have asked us that. But we met working for a company in the West Island. And at the time, again, that's when we first met. And then there was a time that I went back to England for a few years. And when I came back, Andy was already living out in Hudson, and Corey, my wife, and I decided to move to Saint Lazare. And that was really when our friendship started to kind of grow. Because I told Andy we were coming out to Saint Lazare, and he said, "Well, come on over, and we'll help you get acclimatized to the neighborhood." And that's how our friendship kind of grew from there.
And I was wondering, did you know your friendship would have saved a life?
It would have taken a pretty good crystal ball to have guessed at that point. But no, I mean, honestly, I think really what it was, we both have very similar sense of humors and personalities, and it was like we just kind of clicked. No clue that something like this would ever end up being on the cards. But that's just the way the world kind of works. But no, didn't know it at the time.
How did it went when you learned that you had a kidney problem? How did you react, adapt to the situation?
Yeah, I didn't get a lot of chance to react and adapt to the situation, to be perfectly honest. So I was actually it was 2013. I think the transplant was it 2013, Andy, or 2014? I started dialysis.
Yeah, 2013 you started.
2013. So I was actually getting cramps in my legs, and I like extraordinary cramps in my legs. And being a typical man, I was like, I'll go to the doctors another day. I'll go to a doctor the other day. And then when I did eventually go to the doctors a couple of weeks later, they literally the phone rang off the hook telling me to get into hospital. And that was the first time, literally, I had the blood test in the morning. In the afternoon, I was in meeting Dr. Lorcher for the first time, who's a phenomenal individual, fantastic man. Can't say enough about Dr. Lorcher and everything he's ever done for people. And still to this day, and that's literally when in the afternoon they told me I was in end-stage renal failure. So I literally didn't have a chance to react or know anything about it. And then I was by myself because I didn't know what was going on. And I came back and told Corey what they told me. And then the next day I was in, and I had the operation, and I was put the tube into my chest, and I was on to dialysis literally within days.
Can you tell us the impact of the Lakeshore Hospital in your life and Andy in your life in this particular moment?
Yeah, so I mean, this is where we are so fortunate to have facilities, doctors and nurses in our community that can handle scenarios and situations like this, because without a word of a lie, I wouldn't be here. I truly would not be here. Obviously, Andy had a little part to play in this ultimately by donating one of his kidneys, but the step before that, with the Lakeshore and Dr. Lorcher and all the nephrology department, having that ability and those facilities there to deal with stuff so quickly was quite incredible. Literally going from not knowing there was anything wrong within days to being on dialysis, because if you know anything about creatinine, your creatinine should be sub 100. My creatinine was 1,100 and something, so I really shouldn't have been standing. So having the ability and having those resources to go in right at that moment, I mean, it literally saved my life. So and from that's where we have to appreciate. You look at the world and COVID and everything, we have to appreciate so much that we have those people and those facilities on our doorstep who can help us.
When you have learned that you had a kidney problem, who were the first people you talked to, and when did you tell Andy?
This is quite amusing. So obviously, I told my wife first, but and my brother, but of my close friends, it was actually Andy. We were on the beach. We were at the Hudson Yacht Club, and I was in a bit of a state of shock because I was going through this, and it was at a friend's party, or it was a friend's party, and we were sat at a table, and I just told him. I wasn't meaning to tell anybody at that particular point. I was just it was all building up inside of me, so I just was talking to Andy and just told him all about it. And Andy just said, okay, well then, I'll happily get tested, was literally how he responded, and that's how it kind of all snowballed from there, didn't it? And then you went away and looked at the research and everything about being a live donor, and that's where everything kicked in for Andy. I know it sounds funny. I mean, yes, obviously Andy and I are very close because of what we've been through and our wives have been through. But family-wise, we've always been close. Our kids are close. Our wives are close. I don't think it would have changed much anyway. Andy and Anna have these great parties. They come over here. We go to their house. There's loads of friends on the streets that they live on. So I think the difference is that Andy and I've had some experiences with testing and what we've been through that we've had to do together, and things like that. But
I would also say one of the things that happened when I found out from Stephen was that it opened a new world for me. I had no idea what was going on. He had to explain all of this to me, and then I found out some things. But I would also, the office that we used to work in together was very close to the Lakeshore. So I would drop in sometimes after work and see him while he was on dialysis. And so we would spend long periods of time in there together, just chatting away. And so I think it intensified that relationship, because not only were we going through something, but we were spending an increased amount of time, just the two of us together. And for the folk watching who have experience of dialysis wards, everybody there is trying their very best, but they're not cheerful places. It's tough for people to be on top when they maybe don't have a ton of energy. And so just sitting quietly in that fairly somber environment makes you realize the severity of what's going on for you and also for the people around us. It was an intense time. The other thing, of course, is the process of volunteering to be a live donor isn't a guarantee at any stage. I actually thought, like I think most people do, that there was like 1,000,000 to 1 chance we would possibly be a match, and it's most unlikely to happen. And maybe that's why I said I would do it. I don't know, but then you find out that actually the odds are much better now. Science is a wonderful thing, and as Stephen said, the doctors that we have are incredible in what they can do, and it means it's much more likely that people can be donors. But you feel like you're trying to achieve something together. You're battling against something. There was limited time. We did want something to happen, and every time we took a test and we got a positive result, there was a bit of a celebration, knowing we had more to do, but a bit of a celebration. So that sort of step process of going through it also, brings you close together, because you're fighting a common enemy, and so that definitely was the case.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, it's like I'm not allowed to through the whole process, because Andy has to be a donor of his free will. Right, so all the way, Andy went through way more testing than I did. Like the different steps that he went through is quite phenomenal that he has to go through, and all the way through, I'm not getting fed any feedback at all about whether Andy's a match or not. Andy actually has to tell me. So it's not a quick process. And as Andy said, dialysis is for those of you who are listening, it's 4 hours 3 times a week, and it takes up an awful lot of your life. And I always, I got to tell you, the nephrology department there, I can't say enough. They're a phenomenal group of nurses and doctors. Even now, I still go in and talk to them and wave at them and chat to them, because even though I'm not sat in one of those chairs, they're still doing the same fantastic job for other people in the community. And like Andy said, I always appreciated, I sit there for 4 hours. There's only so many episodes of Breaking Bad in a row you can watch. It's like on Netflix. So, that's where, and as Andy said, Andy was there, the constant friend there. My wife was there a lot. My kids were there. And then, interestingly, watching other friends come in and out and their faces, seeing what goes on in a dialysis ward is very interesting. But again, it's the point that, we have that facility. I can't emphasize that enough, that having that facility there is just second to none.
That's beautiful to see that you had a great support from your family, your friends, Andy. And I was wondering, Andy, what did you learn during that process that could maybe help people that are hesitating to do the decision?
So when Stephen first said what was going on, again, I didn't understand. Right, I was in a very simple position of just not really understanding. And I said to him, well, what are your options? And he said, well, there are 2 options. I can wait on a list to find somebody who's deceased who signed their card, or I can find someone who's a live donor. And I said, oh, so how do you do that? And he said, well, basically, I ask people if they don't mind offering a kidney. And as you would, if he'd said, I've got to paint the ceiling, but it's a 2-man job, I would have said, oh, I'll come and help. The first thing you think is, I'll help. And then afterwards you sit and reflect and say, what exactly have I just done? So that's, as Stephen said, then you go and find out what is it that you've just done, because it is entirely voluntary. If at any stage I had stepped out, as Stephen said, he doesn't hear, oh, Andy's backed off. He just doesn't hear anything. And I could say to him, oh, I didn't pass the test. So it was completely voluntary. But as I looked further and further into it, the risks to me were minuscule. I mean, literally minuscule. They did a whole heap of testing to make sure that I was physically able to give a kidney, checked out the other kidney to make sure there were no unknowns about that, checked me out probably more thoroughly than I've ever been checked to make sure that I was in good condition to be able to give that kidney. So you sort of get to understand, okay, and the actual operation and living with one kidney is not going to hurt me, then there's no downside to this. Now, I'm not going to suggest to anybody that major surgery is something to be sneezed at, but if you look at the statistics, which is always my way of doing something, people who give the kidneys are never, ever the ones in danger. And having sat with Stephen through dialysis a number of times, knowing what the outcomes for him were if this didn't happen, it wasn't that hard of a choice. It sounds very blasé, but it wasn't. It wasn't that hard of a choice. In terms of my recovery now, day to day, you wouldn't know that anything had happened. You really wouldn't. In the same way that you look at Stephen and say, he's a guy in good health. I was, within a couple of weeks, I was running again. I'm a fairly keen runner. I was running again. Like any long surgery or any major surgery, there was a long period where there's a fatigue and other issues of getting over that. But in terms of the actual one kidney part of it, almost nothing at all. So really what I learned as I went along was that my initial reaction was like, ooh, that's a really big thing. It's actually not quite correct. And that nowadays the risks are really, really tiny compared to the rewards. I would also say, to back up what Stephen said earlier, Dr. Lorcher has also volunteered to watch my progress as well. So whenever I have a blood test for anything, he sees the results and checks, because he's possibly the busiest man on the planet, but he also is happy to say, look, you gave something, let's give something back to you and cover you. So I would absolutely second that the whole team, but the ones that I individually encountered are just wonderful giving people. So that's a really good support mechanism.
That's great. And I was going to ask you the same question, Stephen. How do you feel now after your kidney transplant?
I mean, I feel absolutely great. I mean, it's 7 years ago now. But no, I mean, like literally the same as Andy, my recovery, I was back at work within, I think it was 3 weeks, right? Literally, it was that fast, the recovery. It was, I mean, I think I'm exceptionally lucky. The match was extremely good. Andy's kidney worked. I felt like I had new batteries put in me. The difference was night and day. I was like, then it was like, oh, maybe I was sick and didn't realize, because I felt like a completely different person. But and a great way to showcase this, and this is something which you mentioned at the start, is that there's actually like an Olympics for transplant patients, and it's every 2 years. And there's a Canadian version, and then there's a World Transplant Games. And I first competed in 5 events in Argentina in the World Transplant Games in 2015, I think it was, or 2015, 2016, where I qualified in the squash. I didn't get through the medal. I didn't do very well, but I qualified in the squash. I drew the Chinese guy in the table tennis and got absolutely hammered in the opening round of the table tennis. But I did make it to the finals of the javelin. I came 5th in the javelin. I came 6th in the shot put, but I won the gold in the discus. So, and this is all to showcase that after a transplant and after all that care of dialysis, is that you're totally back. You get you can do anything, right? You get it back. And then the last one was in in Spain, a really fun one. I got the bronze in the 1,000-meter double kayaking with a colleague who's a heart transplant patient called Troy Hurl from Calgary. And we got the bronze in that. That was in Marbella. That was absolutely fantastic. We would have got the silver if the Germans hadn't crashed into us, but that's a whole other story for another time. But yeah, so again, I mean, it's phenomenal when you see all these people who have just had their life back, their family, like everything. You're not in, as Andy said, the hours you see in dialysis, you're not there anymore. You suddenly get all that back. And honestly, that for me is down to two things. First of all, it's the phenomenal gift that Andy and Anna and his family and his parents and everybody gave, because that's a big thing he has to tell his family as well. And they were outstanding. I mean, like his mum, when I met his mum when she came over and we talked about things, and that's a phenomenal thing. But also the Lakeshore, because without the Lakeshore, I wouldn't have had the dialysis. There wouldn't have been Dr. Lorcher. We wouldn't have got all through the testing as quickly as we did. I was on dialysis for only 9 months, right, which is phenomenally quick time to be on dialysis. And as I said, back at work within 2 to 3 weeks. Andy's running, so really got my life back very, 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 very quickly. My only problem now is that I have to stay healthy, stop eating. So that's the slight downside now.
That's a good problem for everybody right now.
It's a better problem than dialysis.
Healthy, yes,
let's put it that way.
Yes. Definitely. If you have few words of hope for patients that are now going through dialysis.
Absolutely. So one thing that I found, and I'm quite an outgoing, confident guy, asking when you get told that you need to have a transplant, and I was probably fortunate because I was kidneys, right, that you can actually talk to people and get a live donor, such as as Andy. Asking somebody is extremely difficult, right? It's a very emotional moment. You don't know how somebody's going to react, because they could react badly and they want to do it, but they feel they can't do it. So it's a very difficult thing to do. But just be comfortable and confident, and make sure that when you talk to anybody, let them know that you'll still love them, no matter as a friend, no matter what happens afterwards. And also, if you're on the other side, like on Andy's side, if you're considering doing this, just look at the details. And if you can't do it, no one's ever going to say anything, right? But if you can, just look at the facts. And the last thing I think that Andy and I were, and both our wives have been involved with, we actually started up a program or something to raise awareness. We called it the sign of a hero, and just to sign your donor card. If it's something that you can do and you can sign the back of your donor card, please just do it, because you could be a hero. And it's people don't actually like to talk about this because it has death and everything involved with that. But the way that I'd phrase that to them is that, think about if that was your husband, your wife, your sister, your brother, your child, who was sat there waiting, because the list is enormous. People waiting on transplant list is very, very large. Okay, and it just gives that hope that that something could happen. We don't want accidents to happen to anybody, but unfortunately they do. So if you can, please sign your donor card, and please tell your family your wishes, because it's also important that the hospital gets to talk to the family as well. So that's the advice, and just don't give up hope. Just keep going. It's a long road. It can be a little scary, but there's a lot of success stories out there that I would say just stick with it. Andy, would you add anything else on from the donor side?
No, not at all. We were lucky that the first shot at it we had a match, but I think there would have been other people that would have volunteered. And as you say, with the good grace of the health system, people have plenty of time to look around. And good luck. I hope other people have the same level of success that we had, because for both of us, it's been what turned out to be a wonderful experience and a very positive influence on our lives.